Hello, this is Bank Television News Roundup, a compilation of major stories in the weekend. I am Tunde Alabi. Thank you for being part of the program today. The Prime Minister has reiterated her government's position on Brexit. Speaking at the Prime Minister's question Wednesday, Mrs. May said that the government wants to deliver on Brexit by taking back control of British laws, borders and money.
We want to deliver on the road to the British people. That means that we will bring back control of our laws, our borders and our money. Now, of course, that's in direct contrast with the Labour Party's position, who want to be in a customs union, have free movement and pay whatever it takes to the EU. That would mean giving away control of our laws, our borders and our money, and that would be a betrayal of the British people.
Mr. Speaker, I understand the Prime Minister is going to make a speech about this on Friday, but I hope she will address the concerns of 94% of small and medium-sized businesses who say the government is ignoring their concerns about how we leave the EU. But who does she think might be better at identifying the business opportunities of the future? The Confederation of British Industry, the Engineering Employers Federation and the Institute of Directors, or the International Trade Secretary?
Well, the right honourable gentleman talks about the views of business and talks about the views of small business. Can I just refer him to what the Federation of Small Businesses has said about our position? The UK small business community sees the potential wins of an independent UK global trade policy. We want trade kept as easy as possible with the EU27. That's our position. Small businesses are pushing to export to new growth areas: the US, English-speaking nations, emerging economies and the Commonwealth. A good trading relationship with the European Union and free trade deals around the rest of the world under an independent sovereign nation.
Mr. Speaker, the International Trade Secretary says that business organisations and TUC have got it all wrong, that they don't know best how to prosper or grasp opportunities. I just put it gently to her. It might be they've got more of a clue than he has about the interests of business, jobs and living standards. Last week, the Health Secretary, and it's wonderful to see him here today, I assume he was speaking on behalf of the government when he said there will be areas and sectors of industry where we agree to align our regulations. He seems to know the answer. So can the Prime Minister enlighten the rest of us as to which sectors of the government wants to remain aligned and which they plan to diverge?
Well, first of all, the Right Honourable Gentleman himself has said that I'm going to be making a speech on these issues later this week. So he could... just calm down. I've already set out in some detail the position that the government is taking. I will elaborate on that further this week. What we want to ensure is that across a variety of sectors, the goods sector, but also looking at issues like financial services, which are such a crucial part of our economy, that we get the relationship that means that we are able to ensure that we can see that trade going across the borders between the United Kingdom and the remaining EU27 members, and that we have no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, and we're absolutely committed to delivering on that. But he talks about people not having a clue. I'll tell him who hasn't got a clue about business and jobs. That's a Labour Party that wants to borrow $500 billion and bankrupt Britain.
Mr. Speaker, the endless round of after-dinner speeches by the Prime Minister on Europe doesn't really substitute for negotiations as to what is actually going to result from these negotiations altogether. One of the sectors already suffering very badly is that of health and social care. It is highly reliant, Mr. Speaker, on migrant workers. We depend on them for our health and the care of those that need it. Isn't the Prime Minister just a little bit concerned that European Union workers with vital skills are leaving Britain in unprecedented numbers now?
As the right honourable gentleman might have noticed from the last set of immigration figures, we actually still see more people coming into the UK from the European Union than are leaving the UK going back to the European Union. But we do have a care about the number of nurses and GPs that we have in the NHS. That's why we have set the highest levels of training, numbers of people in training for both nurses and GPs. It's why we've significantly increased the opportunities, not just for people who are coming from the European Union to work in our National Health Service, but actually for those people here in this country who want to work in our NHS to get those training places and do the excellent job that we know they will do for patients in our National Health Service.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, from a government that's cut the nurse training bursary, that doesn't seem to understand it takes 8 years to train a doctor, and completely oblivious, apparently, to the fact that there are 100,000 vacancies in the NHS now, I suggest some members get a life and go and visit a hospital and see just how hard those people work in order to cover for the vacancies that are there. Surely we need to give immediate, real assurance to EU nationals they have a future in this country. Mr. Speaker, just 3 months ago, the Foreign Secretary told the House with regard to Northern Ireland, and I quote, "There can be no hard border. That would be unthinkable." That's what he said. Yet, in a leaked letter to the Prime Minister, he wrote, "Even if a hard border is reintroduced, we would expect to see 95% plus of goods pass." He's shouting at the moment. He's obviously mixing up the border with the Camden-Islington border. So, Mr. Speaker, can the Prime Minister confirm that she will not renege on commitments made in phase 1 to keep an open border in Ireland?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, he actually raised 3 different issues in that question, so I'll address all of them. He raised the issue of rights for European Union nationals, and of course key part of the December agreement, the December joint report that we agreed with the European Union, was about the rights of EU citizens living here in the United Kingdom and the rights of United Kingdom citizens living in the EU 27. That was an important thing to have agreed at an early stage in the negotiations. We said we'd do it, and we did just that. He talks about the number of nurses. Of course, there are now 13,900 more nurses on our wards than there were under Labour. And just while he's talking about the number of years that it takes to train doctors, he said it takes 8 years to train a doctor. Well, if he's worried about the number of doctors there are now, 8 years ago it was a Labour government that was deciding the number of doctors that were going to be trained. So we can talk about that. And then... And just finally, because he referred to the position on Northern Ireland, the Foreign Secretary and I are absolutely committed to ensuring that we deliver on no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. That's the position of the UK government, it's the position of the parties in Northern Ireland, it's the position of the Irish government, and it was what we agreed in the December agreement of that joint report. We are all committed to ensuring there is no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland.
Meanwhile, Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has accused Theresa May-led Conservative government of lack of Brexit plan and cabinet division over undecided position on Brexit. The Labour leader made this known while clarifying Labour's plan for Brexit in a speech showing Labour's direction on Brexit.
We're now 20 months on from the referendum that voted to leave, and a year on from the triggering of Article 50. But the country is still in the dark about what this divided Conservative government actually wants out of Brexit. They can't agree amongst themselves about what their priorities are or what the future they want for Britain after Brexit. They've got no shortage of sound bites and slogans, of course. The Foreign Secretary says it will be a liberal Brexit. The Prime Minister says it will be a red, white and blue Brexit. On other days, it's a bespoke economic partnership. The Brexit Secretary at least now promises it won't be a Mad Max-style dystopia, which you might think was setting the bar a little low. While the Trade Secretary can't contain himself at the prospect of pushing Britain into a spiral of deregulation in rights and standards. And the Cabinet seems to have agreed at Chequers to leave the door open to that while their ambitious managed diversion goes on, whatever that means. But the truth is, we really don't know much more about where they're actually heading in these talks. While workers, businesses and everyone who voted in the referendum just want to know what the government's approach to Brexit is likely to mean for their future and the future of the country. As the opposition, we have been trying to hold this government to account. We have a duty to do that. Our message has been consistent since the vote to leave 20 months ago. We respect the result of the referendum. Our priority is to get the best deal for people's jobs, living standards and the economy, as Becky was explaining in her opening remarks. We reject any race to the bottom in workers' rights, environmental safeguards, consumer protections or food safety standards. And we've pushed the government to act to guarantee the rights of European Union citizens living here and of UK citizens who've made their homes elsewhere in Europe. And I want to thank all those European Union nationals that have made their homes here, made such an incredible contribution to our communities, our lives and our public services, and say to the government, it's a shame on them. They've been through 20 months of uncertain horror because there's been no guarantee of their future. We will protect their rights by legislating immediately to guarantee permanent residence for EU nationals living here and the right to bring their families here. We also want to ensure there's a transition period on the existing terms. That was the very strong point that Keir and other colleagues put in Parliament, which would minimise disruption and avoid an economic cliff edge. To avoid any return to a hard border in Northern Ireland and to guarantee Parliament a meaningful vote on the final deal. The Conservative government has dithered and delayed. Their divisions, their incompetence and their deregulation obsession risk putting jobs and living standards at risk as we leave the European Union. This is an economy that has already been damaged by 8 years of Conservative austerity, where wages are still lower today than they were a decade ago, where productivity lags dangerously behind other major economies, where the government has failed to invest and modernise, where more people are living in poverty, and where closing the deficit that was due to be eradicated in 2015, then 2016, then 2017, then 2020, and now been put back to 2025. After years of Tory bluster and slogans, the Conservatives have been found out. They have no economic plan and they have no Brexit plan. Every so often, they wheel out Boris Johnson to promise once more they'll cough up more money for the NHS after Brexit. And they've spent the last 8 years not giving money to the National Health Service that so desperately needs it. Even while they've been able to find billions of pounds, billions, to cut taxes for the richest corporations, to cut capital gains tax for the super rich elite, and to scrap the 50% rate for the richest too. And found billions more to cut inheritance tax on the wealthiest estates and to slash the bank levy. Yet the National Health Service has been subjected to the longest financial squeeze in its history. This is a government that failed our NHS pre-Brexit and during Brexit, and certainly can't be trusted with the NHS post-Brexit. Labour will give the NHS the resources it needs, because we will raise tax on the top 5% and big businesses, those with the broadest shoulders to pay, not by making up numbers and parading them on the side of a bus. We will fund and we will use the funds returned from Brussels after Brexit to invest in our public services and the jobs of the future, not tax cuts for the richest. Today, I want to set out Labour's approach to Brexit in more detail, how we would do things differently, what our priorities are for the Brexit negotiation, and the values that underpin them. The first is our overriding mission, that whatever is negotiated must put people's jobs and living standards first. The Brexit process must not leave our people and country worse off. We're committed to building a more prosperous and more equal Britain, in which every region benefits and no community, absolutely no community, is left behind.
US President Donald Trump has called the Russia probe into Russia's role in the last US election as a witch hunt, just as the latest victim of the probe, White House Communications Director and Trump's longtime ally, Hope Hicks, resigned. The investigation into possible collusion between the Trump presidential campaign and Russia has intensified lately, and the pressure may continue for some time.
That was the interview, ma'am.
Presidential advisor Hope Hicks was the latest to testify before a congressional committee on the Russia probe. Hicks declined to answer some questions, frustrating Democrats like Congressman Adam Schiff.
This is not executive privilege, this is executive stonewalling.
The Russia investigation, led by special counsel Robert Mueller, has intensified in recent weeks. Former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort pleaded not guilty Wednesday to charges including money laundering.
Tell the truth.
Last week, his former deputy, Rick Gates, pleaded guilty to lying to prosecutors and is now cooperating with the investigation. In a series of recent tweets, President Trump once again dismissed the Russia probe as a witch hunt.
They've had this phony cloud over this administration, over our government, and it has hurt our government. It does hurt our government. It's a Democrat hoax.
Among those rejecting that view is the top Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee, Senator Mark Warner.
I continue to believe that this is the most important thing that I'll work on in my whole public career, and getting the whole truth out is extraordinarily important.
The Russia probe continues to cast a cloud over the Trump White House, says analyst Kostas Panagopoulos.
I think it is a significant threat. We don't know what that investigation is going to turn up. We don't know how serious these findings will be for the president.
Concerns about the investigation could further erode Trump's historically low approval ratings in the run-up to this year's congressional elections, says John Hudak.
And if Republicans lose the House and/or the Senate in 2018, it's going to mean a disastrous finish to the last 2 years of Trump's first term.
So far, though, the probe seems to be having little impact on Trump's core supporters, says conservative commentator Michael Barone.
The so-called Russia investigation is less of a negative draw on President Trump and his administration and their attention than many of his opponents would like it to be.
For the moment, the president, like everyone else, is left to wonder when the Russia probe will end and what it might find.
The street section outside the Russia embassy in Washington, D.C. has been renamed after a Russian opposition leader who was killed 3 years ago in Moscow.
A small group gathered in Washington as a section of the street outside the Russian embassy was renamed Boris Nemtsov Plaza. The former Russian deputy prime minister and prominent critic of President Vladimir Putin was killed in 2015 on a bridge outside the Kremlin. At Tuesday's unveiling ceremony, city government officials and U.S. lawmakers paid tribute to the slain opposition leader's work. Nemtsov's daughter said it was the first time since the murder that her father has been acknowledged.
It's really hard to describe what I feel right now because we fought a long time to make this happen. Many people were involved. Probably in some days I will be able to analyze this, but when I see the Boris Nemtsov Plaza sign behind you, I'm proud of it.
В окружении большого количества камер. Я думаю, что я смогу вам об этом сказать через несколько дней, но сейчас уже хочу сказать, что когда я за вашей спиной вижу Борис Немцов Плаза, я горжусь.
Nemtsov was working on a report examining Russia's role in the conflict in Ukraine at the time of his death in 2015. Asked about the dedication ceremony, a State Department spokeswoman invoked Nemtsov's legacy, sending a clear message to Russia.
We renew our call on the government of Russia to uphold its obligations to promote and protect universal human rights, including freedom of expression, peaceful assembly, and freedom of association. We urge the Russian government to ensure that all involved in the crime of his death, including those who organized it or ordered it, are brought to justice.
In Moscow this past Sunday, thousands of Russians rallied to mark the anniversary of Nemtsov's death. Locals laid flowers and paid tribute at an improvised memorial in the city.
He was a great man, brave, honest, and with good principles. I think that the memory of him will grow, and with time this bridge will be named after him, and a monument will appear as well.
So Africa Fresh President Emmanuel Macron is planned to return all colonial era artifacts from Africa may feature as a key part of the discussion between the French president and his Benin counterparts, Patrice Talon, when the African leader visits Paris. Benin Republic has called for the return of all artifacts from the country currently in different museums in France.
Over the years, the Quai Branly Museum in Paris has featured exhibits like this one, illustrating historic injustices through art, such as racism in the United States. But like others in Europe, France's top public museum for African art is now looking inward, considering whether injustice also prevails in its own collection. In Ouagadougou last November, French President Emmanuel Macron said Africa's cultural heritage could no longer remain in European museums and private collections. Over the next 5 years, he said, artifacts in France must be temporarily or permanently returned to Africa, a vow that has sparked debate.
Mr. Macron, the debate has started in France, so each of the museums needs to have a look at their own collections and identify pieces which may have been trafficked illegally or which may have come out of some dubious circumstances during colonialism.
In 2016, Benin became the first African country to ask for its artifacts back. Several thousand pieces taken from the former kingdom of Dahomey by French soldiers and missionaries. Many ended up at Quai Branly. The argument that the art is now French property is rejected by Beninese like Marie-Cécile Zinsou, whose foundation promotes African art.
Benin heritage is shown in France, it's shown in New York, it's shown in London, it's shown in Berlin. The only place where you can't see it is Benin. The French, they left with everything.
There's also a powerful economic dimension. Art attracts tourists like the millions coming to Paris each year.
If you want tourists to come to your country, you need to have a cultural legacy. And how can you do that when most of your legacy has been robbed by many people in the Western countries?
But restitution questions are unsettling some people. Critics argue African art is now universal patrimony, and many African countries don't have the facilities to house old and fragile artifacts. Others believe these issues can be resolved. A group of Paris galleries, for example, built a small museum in Benin, donating art from their own collections.
Is it a national treasure for France, or is it a national treasure for Africa? Both. The problem is to show the thing to the people, to the mass.
Benin may become the first country to put Macron's promise into practice, which means the art of Dahomey may finally be going home.
And with that, we conclude the news roundup for this day and this week. Thank you for being part of the program. I'm Tunde Alabi. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye. Regardless residence status abroad, living outside the shores of one's homeland can really be challenging and sometimes very difficult. Let's be sincere, to keep pace with artists from the host country abroad can really be difficult. Here on Dialogue in Diaspora, we give you every information, every news, every current issue you need to know on happenings outside the UK. Dialogue in Diaspora is your link between the world and the United Kingdom. It's your window to African development. Here, live on Ben Television.